All right, thank you very much, and it's so good to sort of see so many people sort of here so bright and early on a Saturday morning as well. I struggle to get out of bed as well. So yeah, as we said, I'm just going to sort of briefly talk to you what it's sort of like going through high school, primary school, intermediate and university with dyscalculia and dyslexia, because I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but it sort of does make a very big sort of confusing soup. So let's kick off. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of context here to sort of when I was kind of, when I was diagnosed. So as you can see, hiding somewhere away in here, I was officially diagnosed when I was 10. However, I had sort of an initial report that was carried out by SPELD NZ when I was 7. And that sort of highlighted that I might have a specific learning disability such as dyslexia or dyscalculia. But the dyscalculia was actually pretty much ignored then, because I think the reading and writing was just sort of so bad, which I'll show you as I go through it. I was kind of working on my own version of hieroglyphics, to be honest. It was pretty interesting. I was also very lucky in the fact that my parents were good friends with Wendy up there, who I'm sure most of you will probably be familiar with. And she was quite instrumental in sort of giving my parents the words and sort of the tools to sort of talk the teacher language at the high school and kind of get me the assistance and the help and the know-how that I needed to really get me a reader-writer, because once I had that, there was sort of no stopping me, which I was quite happy with. So I'm just going to take you through how many reports you really need in New Zealand just to kind of get a school to understand. But as I said, you're all here learning about this, so you probably know the challenges that you can face. So this was the first report that I had. I'll use this one too, I don't want to sort of get too sidetracked with each one. This was the first report that I had way back in 2000 when I was 7 that sort of highlighted that I might have dyslexia, but I had another interesting report in between actually being diagnosed because my parents noticed that I had some strange mannerisms, and that's a quote. I probably still have them now, to be honest. But I'd sort of do strange things, like I'd kind of walk around and blow on my fingers or sort of have these strange rituals before I did dinner, which I've hopefully stopped doing. Gracie can tell you that I hopefully do, or at least I've told her to tell you that anyway. But because I went to a child psychologist because my parents thought maybe there's something else here, maybe it's not just dyslexia. But the child psychologist confirmed that yes, it was dyslexia. However, I also showed signs of severe anxiety. Now I'm going to show you some, well not show you, I'll talk you through some of the percentile quotes that they used in the report, and then you'll probably understand why there was that severe anxiety there. So they worked out that I was sort of in the upper 91 to 95 percentile for my age group, and I was sort of around maybe 7 or 8 when this report was done. And that was for my oral comprehension and my speaking skills. However, for my maths and reading, I was in the lower 2 to 3 percentile for my year. So it was pretty frustrating going through school being like, I know what I want to say, I just can't get it on the paper, which I'm sure you probably all have heard before. It's probably a reoccurring theme here. So I had another report this was the one that sort of confirmed that I was dyslexic, and as you can probably see, where's the laser thingy gone? This was done when I was sort of around 10 to 12, and once again you can probably see there's some severe discrepancies between where I actually was with my reading and writing and also my maths as well. It wasn't really where I should be for my age group. Then I had another report that was carried out at high school to get a reader-writer. Now this is an interesting story because when I first went to high school, the learning support services there, they weren't so keyed up on the whole dyslexia side of things. It actually took quite a bit of convincing to let them sort of have a reader-writer, because I think the learning support services said, we've never had a student who just needed a reader-writer before, which, as we know, is sort of a bit nonsense really. But this was sort of when Wendy stepped in and sort of gave my parents the right words to kind of communicate with them, and they luckily kind of gave me a reader-writer, and they're actually really supportive after that. Because I think they realised maybe I didn't know what I was doing. And after I had that, I was away. And then a final report for university, and I was very lucky. This was the last spelled sort of dyslexia test I've had to sit, for now anyway, unless someone wants to put me through another one, but they'll have to pay me good money for that. So I'll just give you a little bit of background about my sort of reading and writing. I know that's not the main focus of the talk, but I'll just kind of let you know. So as we said, I did 2 years of SPELD tutoring through SPELD NZ. And that was working quite well. However, we decided to then go through SPELD Waikato with Wendy, sort of doing some correspondence. And while I'm sort of rambling away, I might just point out that you might want to read the last few sentences of this email, because it might sort of show just what it was like going through high school with these, not high school, sorry, when was this? This was primary school, with the kind of so-called teacher aides, which I'll use the inverted commas for that one. As I said, Wendy would send down work and my parents would kind of work me through it through correspondence. And my parents were pretty amazing, to be completely honest. My mum ended up taking me out of school for a couple of hours each week during primary school and intermediate, just because the system had pretty much failed me. So I sort of needed to be caught up in a way. And I'd sort of fly up to visit Wendy sort of once or twice a term just to check in. So, yeah, this is the right slide. I'll sort of show you what my writing used to be like. To be honest, my field notes, when I'm doing sort of my geology fieldwork in the rain, they sort of almost look the same. So this is why you draw pictures, so it's very helpful. Then my art skills aren't too bad, so it's just very confusing. But I'll kind of highlight one thing here. You can see this comment here, you know, big red words, proofread, underline with an exclamation mark. When you're telling a 7.5-year-old severely dyslexic child to do that, it's pretty demoralising. So this is the kind of stuff that I was up against at primary school. And as we can see at age 10, things hadn't really improved, to be honest. It was still just as interesting. So that's enough about the reading and writing. Let's go on to the maths, which is the reason why everyone's here today. So my maths unfortunately kind of took a bit of a back seat because I think the reading and writing was sort of the main thing that my parents wanted me to get better at, because as we know, sort of everyone communicates through reading and writing, so that was the part that kind of took priority. But as you can see, it probably was just as bad as my maths. I think I got a stamp here for sort of colouring in or turning up, I think. I did sort of have a little bit of maths tutoring throughout my sort of time as a young kid. I went to Numberworks, which it sort of worked for me, but it was kind of a bit tricky because I was sort of typing away at a computer screen, and it's quite easy to sort of lose focus and just, I'll just type in and I'll get a game or something at the end. It sort of helped for my sort of rope learning, sort of my basic facts, but apart from that it wasn't so useful, so I had to use another method. And here's some more examples of what my maths looks like. Division clearly wasn't my forte, still isn't. I think I was quite good at the 2 times tables though, but surprisingly not the ones, whereas now it seems quite straightforward. Don't know what I was thinking, but that's all right. Also, my number sequencing was all over the show too. I still, to be completely honest, can't remember my cell phone number, and I was always terrified as a little kid because I couldn't remember my home phone number, and I'd have this sort of reoccurring nightmare that I'd get lost one day and I wouldn't be able to find a phone book, and I'd have to kind of live in a new city with a new name because I couldn't call my parents. Luckily that never happened, so that's good. But so how did I kind of learn maths? Well, I found one-on-one tutoring really worked for me. And as I said, I kind of had an independent maths tutor, so he wasn't actually associated with SPELD. He actually used to work for the Teachers College in Palmerston North training teachers, but he left because the system started going, well, how it's going now, and he didn't really agree with it, and I can sort of understand that as well. But he really used visual methods to teach me, so he used what he called these buses. So he had these wooden blocks and he kind of cut a bus shape out of them, and he drilled 10 holes in each bus. And he had these he had lots of plastic beans, and they were different colours. And you could put these plastic beans in the buses, so you could sort of visually see groups of 10, and they were sort of different colours. And those colours could kind of represent different parts of the equation or sort of different values. So he might have sort of, when I was learning how numbers worked, he could sort of show me what the 10s and the 20s and the 30s or something might look like using these different colours, and you could sort of combine everything, which worked really well for me. So when we were kind of doing things like algebra, I would always get confused sort of looking at a bit of paper and go, what on earth is the y or the x, or what's going on here? So if I sort of got confused, we could always go back to these buses and these different colours, and we could be like, instead of using y, we could say y is now associated with this many sort of green beans in a bus. So then I can kind of work out sort of what I was seeing visually and go back to the equation. And I found that really worked for me. And also he was just quite a funny person, to be honest. And as I said, he used real life examples as opposed to these sort of silly NCA examples you get where Brian's got a pink shirt, so what's the probability of him eating fish next week? They're just ridiculous, really. because I always wanted to be a scientist, so he'd sort of bring everything back to sort of science examples or examples that I could see myself using in real life. So I think that really clicked for me as well, along with the visual method. What slide am I up to? University life. So you might think transitioning from high school with all these kind of problems to university, you might be like, well, this is a big daunting task, you know, how's he going to cope? Is it going to be tricky? But to be completely honest, it was actually a lot easier than you might think. And that's because when you get to university, people know what dyslexia and dyscalculia are. I think in the department that I work in, so I'm in the geology department, I think the ratio of dyslexic academics to non-dyslexic academics is actually in our favour. So it's good. You can get up and sort of have mistakes on your PowerPoints and the students pick it out, not the lecturers, which is quite good. And as I was saying, the learning support services there, they were great. So how many people here have heard of the software Read and Write Gold? Yeah, quite a few people. So this software was amazing. I kind of went from, I think sort of the average grade for my reports were probably about around a C to an A, just with the software. So it meant it would read things to me, it would sort of read my work to me. So it made the proofreading side of things a hell of a lot easier. So I was really lucky to sort of have that support there. And as I was saying, kind of, it's a safe environment, so you feel like you can sort of become a real person in a way, or you feel comfortable saying, oh, I've got dyslexia, you know, can someone proofread my work, or can someone make sure I'm writing down the right weights in the lab so I'm not lying in my thesis accidentally. So I just felt there was a huge attitude change there, which maybe, especially primary school level, I think maybe they could learn quite a lot from the way that university works and maybe the way that their systems are implemented. So now I'm going to go through some examples of numbers that I kind of have to put up with. So as I said before, I'm actually a volunteer with Wellington Free Ambulance. And as you can see, there's a lot of numbers and confusing words in an ambulance. So it's tricky enough kind of having a patient not breathing in front of you, let alone being like, oh God, what numbers am I going to have to use for this? Or have I got the oxygen on the right flow level? So this little device here is what we call the life pack. So this is what we do all our ECGs on, and we do sort of our blood pressures and all that jazz on it. And I'll kind of highlight just, oh, I've gone the wrong way. That's not good. I've broken this. There we go. Can't have nice things. So this bit down here at the bottom, this is where the blood pressures are read. But I've had a few incidences where I've kind of said the blood pressures to the paramedics and they've kind of given me a funny look because I've realised I've actually swapped them around and told them completely backwards. I'm like, oh, that's not good. However, I'm quite lucky that the paramedics they're quite nice people, so I'm sort of very upfront to them before I start a shift and say, hey, look, I've got dyslexia, can you just make sure that you're sort of double checking that I'm sort of writing down the right thing so I can do the handover correctly. And in terms of drawing up medication, luckily that's never been an issue, because it's always best practice to have it checked by a paramedic as well. So I haven't overdosed anyone accidentally yet, which is good. Now, as we said before, I'm actually a geologist as well, which is a little bit tricky being dyslexic because geologists obviously deal with geological time, and geological time, of course, has numbers associated with it. So the thing I find quite tricky is I'll be sort of sitting in a lecture and the lecturer will be going up and be like, oh, the last ice age was this many million years ago, and he could have been sitting there talking in Japanese, to be honest, because I wasn't going to remember the numbers. So I'm quite lucky that maybe the geological timescale is made by a dyslexic as well. It's got all these fancy things called periods with words associated to them. So what I tend to do is be sneaky and remember the words and always have a geological timescale sort of tucked in my back pocket or something for lectures or things. I'm sort of sitting there being like, ah, yes, 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 ah, good, now I can work out what time we're working at. So that's sort of a trick or a way I get around it. So just to kind of finish off, I'll leave you with this slide, which I think is quite an interesting contrast between where I started and sort of where I am now. So we've got one of those examples that I showed you of my early writing, and then this here is actually an industry report that I published a few years ago for a summer scholarship with Victoria University GNS Science and the New Zealand sort of Petroleum and Minerals at MB. And it just kind of goes to show that you can go from something like this to something like this, which I presented at an international geoscience conference to sort of the head of Shell, which was probably the most nerve-wracking talk I've ever done of my life, to be completely honest. But I think it goes to show that with the right support and in the right environment, you can actually do anything you want. And I think this is sort of, if you sort of take anything home from my talk, it's the fact that schools really need to learn at a young age, or sort of there needs to be a system at a really early point that kind of identifies people who might be at risk of dyscalculia or dyslexia, because it's probably a scarily large amount of people who do fall through the cracks and who haven't had the chance to kind of do what they want. So I think there really just needs to be something there that sort of picks it up. But as I say, I'm probably preaching to the converted. So I'll just kind of stop on this slide, which is acknowledging everyone to sort of help me get here. As you probably know, it is a team effort, and I've been very lucky to have a really good team behind me. So thank you all for listening.